Hello and welcome to the fifth video that I'll be posting on my Java tutorial series. And in today's video, we are going to talk about methods. So the first thing that we're going to do is, as always, open up our Visual Studio Code. And inside of that, we are going to click on the new file and make a new file. And I'm going to name this methods.java. And as always, we need to type in public class methods and then have the public static void main string args and then curly brackets. And as you might know, this right here is for running the code. So before I start, I'm going to introduce to you the two types of methods as well as a few terms. Let me just multi-line comment this. Give me a second. Okay, the two types of methods. There is the normal method and the return method. For now, let's stick to the normal method first. So to write a normal method, we have to write the method outside of this code right here because we just need to predefine like a block of code or action that can be performed. So we don't need to put it inside of this public static void main string args. So we're going to put it out, and the way we put it outside of it is by writing the code outside of the curly bracket area or the region of the code, which is indicated with the curly brackets. We're going to start in line 10, and we're going to type in static void name of, let me just, yeah, like this. Let me just comment this. And this is how you write a method. You type in static void name of method, and then you have the brackets, and then you have a curly bracket at the end. And the purpose of a method is to predefine some actions that you want to happen. And it can also simplify everything, because if you have a code that can be reusable, you can use it multiple times, and it will save you a lot of line of code. So yeah. So this is how you write a normal method. How to write normal method. And let me just write down below. Static void. Let's just name this introduction. And for information, the name of the method can be anything, but static void are keywords that I'll also explain about. So introduction, let me just put the brackets here, and then curly brackets, and then let me just print out some introduction lines like is a method. Fine. This is being put out. Okay, as you can see here, introduction is inside of a method, or introduction is a method, and we have the printed out code or action that the method can do. And if we click on run first, we can see that inside of the static void main here, there's nothing. But if we were to call out our method introduction, which can be done by typing in the name of the method and the brackets here, and by doing so, we're actually calling the method. So if we click on run again, as you can see, there is the method being called out. As you can see here, we can print out our line of code here. And this is done by using the method. So essentially by calling the method is called, and then it performs the action. So yeah, it can store up a lot of space, especially when you have big lines of code and multiple times you need to call it. You can just do that by just calling out the same method. As you can see, I called it twice. And yeah, it really saves space. And if you compare it to, having this twice, which takes up 4 lines, and this only takes 2 lines, it's much more beneficial just to do this whenever we have multiple repetitive code. So yeah, that's the normal method. Pretty simple. And before we continue, there is 2 keywords that are associated with return method, and that is the return as well as the parameters. And parameters apply for all methods. So let me explain about parameters first. So when we're dealing with a method, we can actually have parameters. And you might be wondering, what are parameters? Well, parameters are essentially values that can be passed inside of a method to undergo certain manipulation. And the main purpose of this parameter is to help make use or make sure that the code is reusable or applicable to many cases. And the way we can call out a parameter here is, if I were to type in here specific void, let's just use value like that. And then we have a parameter. The parameter will always be found inside of these brackets, right here. And to type in a parameter, we just need to type in the data type. In this case, let's just say an integer value, and it can be any data type, as I have discussed in variables. Int, let's just say integer num1 like this, and then system.out.println num1. So what this code is, or what this method is trying to do, is we get the num1 value, and we print out that num1 value. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but the main difference here is when we want to call it. And when we have a parameter, we type in our value here, and this is how you call out a method normally, right? As seen in the introduction. But now, since we have a parameter value here, there's an error here saying that it's not applicable to the arguments. And that's because we need to fulfill this parameter here. And we can see that the value or data type is an integer, so we can just put in a integer value. And let's click on run here, and you'll see what's going to happen. As you can see, ignore this part. As you can see here, this is our introduction method, and it prints out hello, this is a method. This is being printed out, and as you can see below it, there's 3, and that's because we put inside a value or pass down a value inside of a method through the use of the parameter. And in this case here, to simplify, we can just imagine this as saying num1 is equal to 3. That's because value parameter, so the 3 here will be num1, and num1 can be, being used anywhere for manipulation. So if I were to, let's say, change this value again to 5, we can see that it updates. So yeah, this is the use of parameters, which is to pass down values inside of a method to undergo manipulation. And of course, you don't need to only print num1. You can always do num1 plus num2 or num1 plus 3. So you can always do manipulations towards it so that you can get a certain value. And this will be much more effective inside of a return method. Anyway, I think that's it for parameters. Also, you can have multiple parameters. For instance, we have int num1, we can also have int num2, int num3, int num4. But remember that Since we have multiple parameters, which is indicated with comma, we need to also have sufficient information whenever calling it. So if we have four parameters, one, two, three, four parameters, we also need to have four data that's passed down inside whenever calling. And that's because num1 will be 5, and then num2 will be 3, num3 will be 4, and num4 is 5 again. And this right here is very important to know because you can have unlimited amount of parameters, but only one return value. And just to clarify, you can have multiple data types, so you don't need to follow int. You can always use boolean. You can always use char, which is character, by the way. Char initial, and then we also have string, text, and yeah, it doesn't matter as long as all of the data here are sufficient. So if we were to try to follow this, we can say yes or no, it becomes true, and then char initial could be D, and then text could be, wait, sorry. When we're dealing with char, don't forget you only use the single quotation marks, and text will be, there you go. And if we click on run here, it will still work. Okay. Now we're going to our next topic, which is the return method. And the main difference between a normal method and a return method is the fact that type in return method, we type in static, and then instead of void, we use a data type. And that could be an integer. And just for this example, I'm going to use an integer first. Integer, let's just say an add method, okay? Add method. And then we put the curly brackets, and there we go. And it says here, this method must return a result of type in. And this is where the normal method differs from the return method, and that's because we need to return a value. And the way we can return a value is by typing in return, and then you can put in an integer value. So as you can see here, we have a new keyword that's being used here, which is return. And it depends, in the end of the day, it depends on this data type right here. In our return method, the data type here, which is annotated in green, which replaces the void keyword here, will be the data type that you want to return after manipulation of data. So if you were to have a boolean, then you have to return a true or false. And if you have a char, then you have to return a single character, for instance, like this. So anyway, with that in mind, of course, we have to return a integer value. But before I continue, I also forgot to mention that the static keyword here also means something, because eventually you understand all of this keyword right here. So the static keyword here is trying to refer or tell us that the set method, which is this block right here, belongs to the set class and not, individually apart. And this is just a keyword that's used to say that it's part of the class, and you don't need to really think too much of it until we reach a certain topic. And of course, I'll discuss that further. And then void here is a keyword that you should know by now. And this void keyword here is trying to say that the method doesn't return anything, because we can imagine it as a real void where all the values will go in but never go out. And that's how to simplify the void keyword. And here, this is the data type, and this indicates a value that we want to return after manipulation of the method. And this data type corresponds with the return value that we will have to return back or pass back to the method. And yeah, so let's have or create an add method. And the add method's main purpose is to add a number with another number. And that can be done by using a parameter, of course. Int num1, then let's just do a comma. Because remember that when we want to indicate multiple parameters, we use comma here. And then since we want to add, we can say int num3 is equal to num1 plus num2. And we're just going to return num3. Okay? So now, back to the run code. We're going to call out the method, the add method. And as you can see, we have two parameters, which means that we need to have two values or two integer values. And let's just say we want to add 5 and 6. Forget that semicolon, click on run, and you might be wondering, why is the value not printed out? Well, remember that to print out something, we need to type in system.out.println. And by doing so, of course, we are going to print out a value. Click on run, and you can see that 6 plus 5, or 5 plus 6 is 11. And as you can see here, there's two differences between the normal method and the return method, because the return method returns a value or pass back a value, meanwhile the normal method does not. And since we have a return value, we also don't need to directly system.out.println this. We can always store the value inside of another variable, such as integer added value, for instance, like this. As you can see here, added value will store the value after undergone manipulation. And this is really useful when you're dealing with multiple values and you just need to do all the processing inside of a method, or you want to return a value after manipulation. And it's mostly used for calculations, which is why we have a return add method. And it's really useful whenever you want to, return a value or store inside a variable, because if we are dealing with the normal method, the value will not be stored anywhere other than inside of the method. Meanwhile, when we have a return value or return method, the value can be stored inside a variable outside of the said method and can be used for further purposes. And if we just try to type in here, system.out.println added value here, so we can see we can print out pretty much the value. And yeah, that just really saves some time. And also, don't forget that you can also use a method inside of another method, like this. As you can see, we can always call out a method inside of another method. And it doesn't matter what orientation, even though the add method is below, we can call the method inside of the first method here in line 25. And it doesn't matter. So once you create these methods, they essentially just can be used whenever you want. And that's the power of methods, because you don't need to really, type in all these logical functions and code inside of the operation or the main code, but rather you just call out short methods that can actually perform functions like this. And it saves a lot of time. So yeah, I think that sums up today's video. I know it's a pretty short one, but yeah, this is methods. And you learn about the two types of methods, normal method and return method. And we also have two new keywords that you have to remember, which is parameters, and it applies for all methods, and return value. And here we have our main code here, which is used to run the public static void main string args, and the static keyword here is already identified as being a part of the class, and the void here means that the set method does not return any value, and that applies for all of our methods as well. Here we have the static keyword, which means that it's a part of the class, and the void keyword means it doesn't return any value. And the integer here is used to indicate what data type we want to return after undergone manipulation. And as you can see, we chose integer because it suits the best. And then we also get to be introduced with parameters, which are essentially acting as values that can be passed down inside of a method to make sure that it can be reused. And here we go. We can see the second method value here. We have a lot of parameters, and each and every parameters can function well and can be used freely, and it is based on all the data types. And then we have our print line where it prints out the value, and you can use the parameters to manipulate them. And then we have the return method, which is a bit special because it uses the data type here to replace void, which means that we return something, and we have to return the value using the return keyword and a value that is suitable or following the set data type. So if it's a boolean, then we have to return a true or false. And I think that's it. That sums up today's video, and I hope that you get to learn more about Java programming, and I'll see you in the next video.